It all started like any other Christmas. The house was decorated with twinkling lights, the aroma of cinnamon and gingerbread filled the air, and the Christmas tree stood tall, proudly displaying the ornaments that had been passed down through generations. But for me, this year's holiday would be a time of unexpected heartbreak, a betrayal by the people I once thought would always have my back. It wasn't a typical family drama, but one that played out in front of my wife, my son, and me. And it would change everything. I've always loved Christmas. Growing up, it was the time when our family gathered under one roof, filled with laughter and joy. There was something magical about the season. But as I got older, things started to shift. My parents, who were once warm and loving, started to drift away from me. They weren't as warm to Sarah, my wife, and it was hard to ignore. For context, Sarah and I had met in college. She was everything I had ever wanted. Kind, caring, and compassionate. She wasn't the woman my parents had expected me to marry, but I loved her. That's all that mattered to me. After a whirlwind romance, we got married, and soon after we had our son, Max. From the beginning, my parents didn't hide their disapproval of Sarah. It wasn't anything direct, but there was always a quiet coldness towards her. She wasn't from the same background they had hoped for, and they made sure to express their displeasure in subtle ways. It started with little things, the way Sarah dressed, the way she spoke, the way she carried herself. They criticized her cooking, her taste in music, and even the way she held herself in social situations. The more Sarah tried to prove herself, the more distant they became. But it wasn't just about Sarah, it was about me too. My parents didn't approve of the choices I was making. But despite their disapproval, I loved Sarah, and I was willing to fight for her. Christmas was always the one time of year where we could pretend that everything was okay. My parents were always insistent on getting the whole family together for the holidays, no matter what was going on throughout the year. It was tradition. And I hoped that one Christmas things would change. Maybe this year my parents would finally accept Sarah. This Christmas was supposed to be different. Max, our 5-year-old son, had been eagerly awaiting the holiday season. It was his first year where he understood the magic of Christmas, gifts, decorations, the excitement of Santa. It was a time for him to bond with his grandparents, to experience the joy of family. But as much as I hoped it would be a time of peace and happiness, deep down I had a nagging feeling that things would not go as planned. The day before the party, my mum called to confirm everything. "We're really looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Just make sure Sarah doesn't bring any of her unusual dishes. You know how your father is about food," she said with a tone that was both casual and dismissive. "Don't worry, Mom, she'll bring the usual dishes." "I'll make sure everything is fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't need to hear it, but it stung. I hated the subtle jabs, the microaggressions that seemed to come from my mother, always about Sarah. I thought I could handle it, that I was used to it by now. But hearing my mom talk about Sarah like she wasn't part of the family, like she was some kind of outsider, always hurt. The morning of the party, I got the usual mix of excitement and dread. Max was beyond excited, racing around the house with his new toys, imagining all the things he would do with his cousins. Sarah tried to keep the mood light. I could see the strain in her eyes, though. She wasn't thrilled about going, but she did it for Max, who she knew would be overjoyed to see his grandparents. I tried to reassure her, telling her that it would be fine, that maybe this year my parents would finally understand how much she meant to me. We arrived at my parents' house just as the sun was setting. The house was beautifully decorated, just like every year. The smell of turkey and mashed potatoes filled the air, but as soon as we stepped inside, I felt an unexpected coldness. The warmth that usually came from being surrounded by family, the ease of laughing and catching up was missing. It was like there was a wall between us and them. Max rushed to the living room, excited to see the tree and his cousins. But as soon as he entered the room, my dad barely acknowledged him. He didn't greet Sarah either, not with a smile or a hug, just a quick, barely there nod. "Hi, Grandpa." Max beamed, holding out a toy car he was so proud of. But my dad didn't even glance at the toy. He looked past Max, eyes distant. Nice," he muttered. That was it. Max's smile faltered, and I could feel the sting in my chest. Everything. All right? I asked my dad, trying to smooth things over. Everything's fine, he grumbled, not making eye contact. But it wasn't fine. Not by a long shot. As the evening went on, the tension was impossible to ignore. Max kept trying to interact with his grandparents, showing them his new toy cars, his excitement palpable. But my dad kept brushing him off, barely responding. And every time Max turned to my mom, she would just offer him a distracted smile, almost like she was doing him a favor by acknowledging his presence. And then came the moment that would change everything. Max was playing with his toy car on the living room floor when my dad, visibly irritated, stormed over. "That thing is too loud. Take it outside," he snapped, his voice raised. Max froze, confused. "But Grandpa, it's just a toy," I said. "Outside," my father barked, cutting him off before Max could finish. I stood up, about to say something, but before I could speak, Sarah stood up and intervened. "Steve, stop it," she said, her voice calm but firm. "He's just a child. You don't need to yell at him." And that was when everything exploded. My dad's face turned red with anger. "You don't tell me how to raise my grandson. You're not even part of this family. You don't get to say anything." The room went silent. Everyone seemed to freeze. Max, hearing his grandfather yell at his mother, began to cry, his small frame trembling with fear. "Dad, stop it. This is too much," I said, stepping forward, my heart racing. But my father didn't care. He was furious, and he wasn't backing down. I looked around the room. My mom was still silent, her face unreadable, while my siblings' children were, laughing and playing, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted. My father's anger was focused entirely on Sarah and Max. I couldn't stand it anymore. I took a deep breath, swallowed my anger, and said, "We're leaving. This is ridiculous." As we gathered our things and made our way to the door, I saw my siblings' children running around, enjoying the attention of their grandparents. They were laughing, playing, and getting all the love and affection Max had been denied. I could see the hurt in Sarah's eyes, and I knew she was crushed. Max, still sniffling, was holding onto her tightly, not fully understanding why his grandfather had treated him like that. It was the final straw. I had always tried to give my parents the benefit of the doubt, but this Christmas, they had crossed a line. We left that night, heading home with a heaviness in our hearts. Max was quiet, his little face wet with tears. Sarah didn't say much either, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. She had been nothing but kind and loving to my family, and yet it seemed like they would never accept her. At home, we didn't have the grand Christmas celebration I had hoped for, but we had each other, and that, I realized, was all that mattered. Max and Sarah were my family, and nothing, no one would ever change that. The months following Christmas were filled with tension. I tried to reach out to my parents, to make excuses for their behavior, but deep down I knew I couldn't just ignore what had happened. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay when they had treated my wife and son with such cruelty. I realized then that family wasn't just about blood. It was about loyalty, trust, and love. And I would protect my family at all costs. Max and Sarah are the family I choose. I can't change my parents, but I can control who I let into my life. And if that means walking away from toxic people, even if they're family, then so be it. Because when it comes to family, sometimes the hardest thing to do is to protect the ones you love, even from the people who should love them the most. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.